And thanks for joining us. As usual, I will be making sure it's working, sharing around, while Miranda entertains you with sparkling, interesting conversation.
Sparkling, interesting conversation. Now is my time to yell at Brett.
Uh-oh.
Brett, have you eaten your Larabar and your cookies over there?
No, I'm glad you mentioned that. I must apologize to our viewing audience because throughout the beginning of the broadcast, I will be munching on things which normally you don't do on a talk show. But because I'm at 105 on my blood sugar
and headed down,
I'm going to be making sure my blood sugar stays up and I don't gently fall out of the frame as I pass out from a diabetic coma.
Yes.
But trust, however, that if that does happen, Miranda will go on with the show because the show must go on while Aspen drags me out. And yeah.
No, that's not true. But you may periodically see me scanning Brett's arm over here just to make sure that the cookies and the Larabar are working.
Yes.
They can't work unless you eat them.
They can't. But I'm going to share this and then I'm going to start eating. And so here we go.
Just so you know, these are the moments in time when Brett says that I yell at him.
She yells at me.
Yes, because notice his compliance level.
My compliance level. What are we calling today? We are live. We are.
Well, I called it Key of Faith, but you know.
I will use that.
Okay. Yes.
Yay.
Well, just so you know, it's still hot in Texas.
Yes, it is.
Yes, it was a high, they said, of 108 today. It felt every single degree of that, if not a little bit more.
Yep.
So, but this last week, Asper and I had hair appointments today. Not today. We had hair appointments this last week, and kind of a fun girl thing to do together. And this woman has she has her own little shop shed next to her house out in the country-ish kind of, and I had seen in the news where in North Texas apparently all the drought causes some real problems for the foundations of houses, and it causes them to crumble, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So I didn't read the article, but I did find it kind of interesting. And wouldn't you know it, this woman said that last summer they had to replace or really work on their foundation because that had happened to their foundation. And so, when she at first told me that she was doing a bit of watering this summer, I just presumed that she had some plants outside that she was trying to keep alive, right? But no, that actually wasn't the case at all. She was literally watering their new foundation that they had put in. So I thought, well, that's really new and different. So instead of keeping your plants alive, she was trying to keep the foundation of their house. But that just, there's an analogy there, I suppose, where we, too, the foundations of our spiritual life should be watered by the Holy Spirit and keep us all solid and standing.
Mm-hmm.
Our house, we need to build our house on the solid rock, or the storm comes along and the wind blew and the rains came down.
Not here, it didn't.
And that's true, it didn't happen here.
Not in Texas.
On one hand, I'm thankful that the tornado warnings and watches and such are not as numerous here this summer as they were, last year. Last year it seemed to be semi-continuous over the summer, but we really haven't had much, if any, rain this summer. So there was a handful at the beginning in the spring and such, but not in months. So,
You know what used to frustrate me as a teacher?
No, tell us, Brett.
So I was a chaplain in the academy for most of my teaching career, which means I taught mostly Bible. And Aspen's story made me remember some of that. I don't know if I ever got visibly frustrated, but I would get ticked off that as a young teacher, I would get, they'd come in and, they just weren't all that into whatever we were talking about, Some classes, not all classes. And it'd be frustrating. As an adult, you're thinking, oh my gosh, this is, why you're going to a private Christian school is to get Bible class, and you're blowing this off. It used to tick me off.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're ready to get started now.
Yeah.
Okay, just so you know, heads up, today is story day. We have just lots of stories.
Mm-hmm. And that's the intro to one of them.
Yes, that's the intro to one of them. I actually invited Aspen to come up here and tell the story since it's it happened to her, but she really likes the teacher, and so she didn't want to talk about them. So anyways, we're not saying anything bad, but yeah, he's her Bible teacher this year, and we heard him speak before. He seems to be very concerned about the kids' salvation and their relationship with Jesus and such, and probably takes time even in classes outside of Bible class to bring this to the kids' attention and such. So I guess it was the beginning of this week, and the kids were just walking into the class pretty, he said, this is one of the most meaningful things you're going to do at this school, is to study in this Bible class. And yet he said, y'all just come in here thinking it's a chill class, or you can sit around and be chill. And it's one of the most important things in your life.
Yeah. And it's funny when she said that, and I hope I don't upset Aspen. Because that used to get to me too when I was a young teacher. And as you get older and you get more perspective, two things you find out. One, you find out moments like that, not all the time, but a lot of times have more to do about you than what's actually happening in class. And you may be frustrated because of how they're acting, not so much as just Bible, but whatever, or something's going on. You do find out at times when you get upset, it really wasn't so much the kids, but something pushed your button, and it was more about what was going on with you. And the second thing is that, you're not the end all to their salvation. And yes, it's important stuff. And yes, it's, but timing is everything. And as a teacher, you get to the point where you're thinking, you kind of come to the point where you accept that about 80% of what you're teaching, they're never going to remember anyway. You're planting seeds. You're hoping they grasp pieces.
Right, but you know what? We know that everybody listening to us today is going to remember
every little thing we ever say.
Every detail we say, yes. Down to the Bible verse.
Yeah, because like back in the day, I would have A students who were great kid, and I had them for like 2 years of Bible, and I would teach them these things, and Daniel and Revelation and salvation. And then they'd go to college and they'd come back and say, oh, I heard this the one thing in this Bible class at college I learned that. And I was like, I talked about that for 2 years and you're just now getting it in someone else's class? So age will give you perspective and humility that, you do it, you go in, and class is way more about building relationships than passing knowledge. It really is. Knowledge there, passing knowledge is good, especially in high school. Your class is about building relationships, and they will glean some things, but they will always remember the connection they had with you. Mm-hmm. Anyway, that's my 2 cents worth as a old, forgotten, has-been educator.
And
you see, this is what I'm talking about right here.
Well, I'm not saying anything. I'm using a nonverbal.
Body language.
We're going to talk about nonverbals later today.
Yeah.
So, somehow or other, I have lost my notes. Uh-oh.
Anyway, so that was cool to hear from her. Story. And reminded me of my old days of teaching. I apologize to any of my students from Madison Academy and that I may have yelled at or thrown things out. My apologies. I am wiser now.
Okay, so basically we all wait around for the big things. Well, sometimes we wait around for the big things, right? But God is there in all the little things. And will we see Him? Will we hear Him? And will we even look for Him there? So, do we even look for God in Bible class?
Yeah, we don't tend to look for rather than the little things. Isn't that where we do, the big things, the big...
Yeah.
I think it's the little things.
We always want, this depth and this and this, that. And yet, so much depth can be found in just the little moments and little things in life. Yep. So, a friend of mine, she rides her bike to the nearby grocery store, And
Here in Texas?
No.
Because if not, then she's losing a lot of weight to sweat, because it's 120 down here.
No, they actually have a car. She doesn't live in Texas. She lives in Nebraska. And they actually live where they can just hop right onto a bike trail and ride on over to the grocery store and stuff. So they have a car, but she sometimes, well, actually weekly, she would take her bike to the store and pick up some groceries for them. So considering it was just her and her husband, it's not as though she had massive amount of groceries that she needed to buy. So there was one week she came home and she discovered she didn't have her bank card. And so she was kind of worried about that, and she was searching high and low for it, and she prayed about it and everything. And finally she decided, well, she'd probably lost it for good, right? Well, the next week, very same day, a week later, she goes back to the grocery store. Probably took her husband's card with her, I suppose. And as she parks her bike, she sees that there on the ground, and I'm pretty sure it had been windy and rainy that week, there on the ground, right where it clearly had fallen the week before, was her bank card. And the next time I talked to her, she was so excited about that it was a little moment, right? Mm-hmm. And yet, here God had shown up for her, and she was so excited about that. So, sometimes we think we have problems, small ones, big ones, medium-sized ones, right? But we only have problems because we can't see beyond the problem. And yet God, he doesn't have problems because he doesn't get stopped up this side of the problem. He can see beyond it. So therefore, he has solutions and not problems.
He didn't show up for me when I lost my card. Well, that's because I probably threw my card away.
Well,
I lost it like over a year ago.
He did show up for you because I have my card.
Yeah, you have your card. That's true.
And I haven't lost my card, which is really amazing because occasionally he borrows my card, and between the both of us, we can lose and misplace cards.
Yeah.
Cards and keys, you're drinking water. It's kind of,
Yeah, but I lost mine over a year ago. And, everything's online, so it's like I still buy stuff online and stuff with it, but I'm sure I had it in a bag and I threw it away.
Yeah, he keeps waiting on him to send him a new one. And the old car's expired by now.
By months.
Yeah.
And they still take it. I'm not sure. It's convenient, but I'm not sure if that should worry me or not.
Yeah, right? So basically God has solutions, and he often shows up with his solutions at a time that we least expect it, in ways that only God himself can do.
My dad used to say God is rarely early, but he's never late.
Yeah, he's never late, but boy, he sure cuts it close sometimes.
Yeah.
So, well, actually, he does cut it close, probably every time. So
which is probably another lesson in character building for us.
Yes.
I get a lot of those. Yes. They're not fun.
He does, and times that I remind him that this is just a character building experience. Yes. Okay, so a number of years ago, I drove a 1997 Toyota RAV4, and it was a really great car. It was just a wonderful car.
Ooh,
Brett?
There's still pictures of it. Yes, so there's two pictures. One, it's covered in snow.
Yes, one is covered in snow. So I just have to tell you, if you ever want a car that sticks to the road in snow and ice, you get yourself an all-wheel drive Toyota RAV4. Because I got that when I lived in Alaska, and I kid you not, I could stop mid-hill on solid ice that had not been graveled or salted, and I was driving a 5-speed, so I just put it in first, and I could take off without spinning the tires. That thing, and you'd be driving on ice and such, and you weren't slipping and sliding on the road. And granted, I'm a relatively careful driver, but all the same. And now the car we have the full-size Subaru station wagon, the Outback. Yeah, and so I thought, well, it's a bigger, heavier car. It's going to sit solid on the road when it's icy and snowy out. But it leaves me a little uncomfortable because just driving down the road carefully, every now and then you just find yourself sliding a little, which the RAV did not do. And so you want a car that sticks to the road? Like I said, the all-wheel drive Toyota RAV4 is the car
It's
to
a nice
have.
car.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so anyways, Brett, in the meantime, at the very same time, he had...
Oh, wait, before we get to me, we have to show Aspen's video.
Aspen's video?
Yes. Here's Aspen. She was so cute as a baby. I mean, she still is, but I mean, okay, anyway. Here's Aspen.
Never mind. If you see pictures of us, I don't know, Brett threw us in there at the same time, but it's like, wow, were we ever that young?
We were that young, yeah.
Yeah.
So here's Aspen, who, as a child, was so industrious and helpful. She's here washing the car.
Hello, Daddy. I'm washing the car. Do da do do.
Yeah, there you go. I thought that was a longer video. I think Aspen stopped it on purpose. Because it's like, here I am, washing the car. Dun, dun, dun. It was fun. Anyway, you were saying.
All right, okay, so well, I had this really great, reliable, at that point in time, it was probably almost a 10-year-old car.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Brett had a 2004 Subaru Baja.
Yeah. So
And it was a lemon.
let's back up.
From
so
day one.
I've had two Subarus other than the one we have now.
And you bought both of them new.
Yeah, both of them are brand new. And the first one was a XT. It was called the XT Coupe. And it was my first actual brand new car ever. And it was cool. It was like built in like a real wedge. It was like a wedge of cheese. It was really aerodynamic. And it was a cool car. It was in the 80s, and it had like a joystick for a stick shift, and they had kind of gone with gaming theme. It's like the dashboard was like out of a video game. It was really cool, and boy, I was all that. The car and driver used to say, if you can't afford a Porsche, get the XT. It was really cool. It had automatic suspension. Like the faster you went, the lower the car would go to the ground. So like at speeds, it would be, you know. And the thing was a piece of junk. Could not. I actually broke the camshaft in it. And if you know anything about cars, NASCAR drivers break camshafts. Normal people don't break camshafts. And so I took it into Subaru. And to their credit, you know, they said, let us research this. And they looked at it and like, you know, this is not supposed to happen. So we're going to assume this was somehow our fault, and so they fixed it for free. So kudos to them. But it came out later they had made the engine too strong for the actual camshaft. It didn't matter. They were always going to break no matter what. And so they discontinued that. And so I'll never buy another Subaru. Later, I fell in love with the Baja. And I just so happened to pick their next lemon.
Yes, you did.
Oh, well, it was a turbo.
Right,
Yeah.
It was a turbo. 5-speed turbo. That was the most fun car to drive. It really was.
They did say in the reviews, they said, oh, the Baja's a great car, except if you get one, get the turbo because the four-cylinder just doesn't have enough power. So
Right,
we
yeah.
got the turbo.
Yeah, I mean, I'll have to admit, okay, while my RAV was a great car, it had all of about 127 horsepower. But I drove it like it was much faster. But that Baja was 180 to like 220 something horsepower with the turbo.
Yeah.
And that was fun.
It could get up and go. I loved it because it had like it was actually a modern version of the old Subaru Brat. It looked, it was the same type of thing, the front part of a car, the back part of a pickup truck. But the turbo kept burning out.
Those are expensive to replace, by the way.
Very expensive. It's like $1,000, $1,500 every time.
$1,500 every time.
Yeah, to replace it.
And that was happened at least 3 times.
Yeah, and that was the weird thing. The first time it burned out, and you let it run dry. They take a lot of oil, and you let yours, and I was like, how? I don't think I was negligent on oil, but okay, I guess it was my fault. So, Well, then it went out a second time, and I was like, I've been watching the oil. And the third time it went out, I was like, something's going on.
It wasn't until we had already traded the car in, right? Yeah. And months later, we were at a yard sale. And someone else was at the yard sale with the very same car. But it's like, oh, I used to have one of those, but blah, blah, blah. And the guy said, oh, yeah, well, they discovered that they had a defect with their turbo.
Yeah,
basically.
it was the actual, in the build of the car, there was a defect in the turbo system where it would choke the oil. You could have plenty of oil, but the turbo would choke the oil out and it would dry out and destroy your turbo. And Subaru just didn't tell anybody. They just said, when Bajas come in for service, fix this. Here's, how to fix it. And so it saved them from doing a recall, I guess. It saved them from... So it was a known defect that they were just fixing under the radar, but people like me who never heard about it fixed their turbo 3 times and finally said, this is junk, because I had a brand new car and she had a, 20-year-old RAV, and her car was way more reliable.
We if we ever took any road trips, we always took the RAV.
Yep.
And that, and I mean, we were still paying off. We were still paying off the Baja, and we dumped so much money into repairs on it because Brett was thinking, if I just keep replacing things that need replaced, someday I'll have like this brand new perfect car.
Yeah.
It can't break down anymore. And I kid you not, no sooner did we pay it off, and it broke down so big that it was going to cost more than it was worth. And so finally he gave up.
Yeah.
And he traded it in on our now 2010 Subaru station wagon, Outback, which we really like it. It's very nice. It had heated seats. Has heated seats, which is nothing here in Texas. But considering we moved to Nebraska after we bought that, it was really nice.
It was nice, yeah. And to great, I actually had decided another car. I went by Subaru, and I went in and I told him, like, I'm just telling you, I would never own another Subaru in my life. And this salesman was like, "So don't tell me about it," And I told him the story about the XT and then about the Baja, and he was like, "Man, that is bad." And I think it was the Baja wasn't worth whatever, and he ended up giving us a couple thousand over what it was worth because we had so much trouble with it. And so he gave us a good deal on the Outback, and then really gave me money that was throwaway to them because he gave me way more than the Baja was worth. In fact, we saw it later.
We did in a not a backwoods, but
it's the third
a used car.
The ones that, if you know anything about used cars market, if they have a decent one, they sell it on the lot. If they don't have a decent one, they sell it to their joined used car lot. And the ones that are like just junk, then they give to these side of the road, honest lefties used cars, and that's who tries this, and that's where it was at. Is what I see. I can tell you about that car.
Yeah, and all the money we dumped into that, like my RAV, it was significantly older, and we hardly ever put any money into it.
We were about to put money into it just to have it redone. Didn't need it, but we were gonna like do a new paint job and and then Colby wrecked it.
He wrecked it. Yeah. But anyways, we're
way off topic.
We're entirely missing.
So thanks for joining us.
We're entirely missing the story here.
There is something to the cars, though. It does have a point.
Yes, it does have a point. So okay. So like we said before, we would always take the RAV on a road trip, even though it was older and such. So we were living out in Maryland, and his parents lived down in the Carolinas, and so we always took it. Well, it never broke down on us, and the one trip though, we were coming back home, and all of a sudden it started to miss. Well, it was a 5-speed, and so we both just thought, well, he didn't gear down like he should have.
Right.
Eventually, he kind of figured out that wasn't the problem, and so a week or so after we got home, he took it into the shop, and they ran the diagnostics, and they're like, well, it's either the spark plugs, and that'll be about $150 to fix that, or it's something else that's going to cost about $500, or it's this other thing that was a transmission. Basically, you might as well just drive it until
to build up. It's not worth fixing.
It wasn't worth fixing. And so we, since it was running, and we had 2 cars that ran at that point in time, we just kind of stuck our head in the sand, and it kept on running the same. As it had when it first started missing. It didn't change anything. So fast forward to about a week before Thanksgiving, and I was coming home from a grocery shopping trip, and Brett calls me on the phone, and he's like, he says, the Baja just broke down again, it'll be another $1,500 to fix it, and so we'd have to save up some money to do that. And so I get off the phone, and I'm listening to K-Love Radio, and I start thinking, and I'm like, well, I could ask God to fix the RAV. After all, we don't know what's wrong with it, right? You know. And I mean, at this point in time, the Baja was entirely out of commission. And so I thought, well, I don't know. I don't know if I should do that. And then I kind of went back and forth, and I thought, well, you know what? God can fix it if he wants to fix it. He doesn't have to fix it. I can just ask him, and if he wants to, he will. And if he doesn't want to, then he won't. And it's fine either way. So I asked him to fix the car. Well, honestly, nothing changed at that moment. To just continue driving home, listening to Caleb. And there was no special moment where God's like, yes, I'm going to do that for you. Or, yeah, no. So, but after that, I started listening every time I took the car out to see if it was still missing. And every time I took it out, of course, it was still missing. Well, fast forward again to about a month later, and my youngest son, was going to be flying into Washington, D.C. from Tennessee for Christmas break. And of all things, he got a flight into D.C. at like 5:30 p.m. And so we lived about an hour from the airport, but I thought I'd better allow at least an hour and a half to get down there. So I was pretty right. I got down there, picked him up, drove back. It was a 3-hour trip in rush hour traffic. Basically, it was dark by then, and 5 lanes, and all this other kind of stuff, So I got home, I crashed in my favorite living room chair, and I started to unwind. And all of a sudden, as my brain started unwinding, I thought, you know what? You drove all the way down there and back, and the car didn't miss once. I was like, yeah, right. How would you even know that? Because you weren't even paying attention. Well, after that, of course, I was really excited to be listening to see if the car still missed. And no, I listened every time I took it out for like a couple weeks because I just really had to be sure. And it didn't miss in the next couple of weeks. And so I asked Brett, I said, has the car been missing when you take it out? And he thought for a moment, and he's like, no, it hasn't. So I asked my youngest son, has the car been missing when you take it out? And he's like, no, it hasn't. And so, needless to say, I was super excited that God had fixed the car. And you know what? It didn't go back to missing. It didn't start missing after that. I'd say we drove it probably at least 5 years after that. Yeah. And until, of course, Colby wrecked the car.
Thanks, Colby.
He was fine. The car was not.
Yeah, the car was not.
Yes. So basically, sometimes it is when we least expect it that God shows up.
Yeah. That was really a miracle kind of car. I remember something about we took it in for brakes. And they said, no, your brakes are fine.
Yeah.
And
we honestly never had the brakes. We had 225,000 miles, or almost 230,000 miles on there. We never got new brakes. They just kept turning. Yeah, turned the pads, and then finally they put some new pads on, I think.
I was just like, okay, that's all it's got to have. And I took it in. Not that it was just like, it's got to need it. And the guy looked at it and said, no, I make money off of you, but you don't need any work.
Yeah, every now and again we'd take it in, and we're like, well, we think we need this and this and this. And, they'd come back out and say, well, when was the last time you had such and such changed? Oh, I never had that done. Well, how about this over here? No, never had that done. And then no, you don't need that, and you don't need that, and you don't need that like you thought you did. And also didn't need these other things they asked about.
Yeah.
But, they'd come up with a little something, maybe about $1,000 worth of work.
They'd come back and say, but you have the Baja, right? Because it needs a ton of work.
Yeah, so every few years we might put, $1,000 in?
If that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a good car.
Yeah, it was. So, moving on to Joseph. And
wait, what was your whole? We should remind everybody what the whole point of those stories were.
Oh, right. I think I did. Sometimes it's when we least expect it that God shows up.
Yeah. Sometimes in ways we never expect, we don't even ask for. Sometimes it's just in those things that God shows up. And like, wow, we're not even looking.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. And so Joseph was sold into slavery when he was 17, and he worked for Potiphar, the guy he was sold to, for 11 years, and then he went to prison for a crime that he did not commit, right? But even while he was in prison, he helped the other prisoners, right? And whoever God puts in front of us at any given moment, that person becomes the most important person in our lives, because they may be a real test to our character, but this is an opportunity to live out the love of God. So it is a door that God has opened for us. the place where it may seem the least likely place for God to show up, but will we bring the actions of God to that moment? So Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 says, I will trust in the Lord with all my heart and lean not on my own understanding, and in all my ways I will submit to him, and he will make my paths straight. And so while Joseph was in prison, all of a sudden the Pharaoh's cupbearer and the baker were there in front of him, and he did the work of God. He interpreted their dreams for them, and then he asked the cupbearer to please go back to Pharaoh and tell him that he was imprisoned unjustly and such, right? Yeah.
I'm sorry, you just come out, and the first thing I'm thinking of, I wonder what the royal baker would actually bake. I mean, they had bread, but what else did they bake back then?
I bet they had
They had
things,
cupcakes.
but they had things like at least honey cakes,
Oh,
don't you
I
think?
guess. I
And
know.
maybe date cakes. And
I feel bad. She's going off over her deep spiritual moments. I'm like, I wonder what the heck he baked.
Well, I did some research into like desserts that the Romans had.
Oh,
and
really?
such. Yeah, and it was far more complicated, if you will, than
Yeah.
we would give them credit for.
Oh,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't have guessed.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And they probably didn't have, even an easy bake oven. They probably had a, really like outdoor brick something that
Yeah,
was
there's-
hard to bake in.
yeah.
You just couldn't set the temperature and the timer. And
Yeah.
ding, it's all ready. Go check your... No, probably wasn't like that.
Yeah.
Okay, please continue.
Okay.
I will try and stay focused.
Okay, so basically, I'm sure really that all Joseph wanted to do was go home and see his family. Okay, but when we submit to God, he does make our paths straight, right? I'm sure it was on a day that Joseph least expected it that the prison doors were open and God led him out to be second in command in the most powerful country on earth at that point in time, right? So God showed up doing only what God could do, taking him from being prisoner, to being second in command of Egypt at that time. I mean, it must have blown his mind, right? All the guy wanted to do is go home, open the prison doors, and let me go home because I'm innocent. And yet,
He was a very family guy. Joseph, he had a real close relationship with his father and his youngest brother. He was closest to. I'm sure, when you're in prison, you think a lot of that. That's probably just he wanted to get back home to that.
yeah. So do we ever waste what we have by waiting for God to give us what we want? And I can't say that Joseph did that. He was a hard worker for Potiphar. He was also a hard worker in prison. And so do we waste away with those little things while waiting to do something great? Jesus said we must become as little children. Maybe this is what Jesus meant when he said we must become as little children, right? Instead of waiting for the big things, which may or may not happen, let us dig deep into the little things in life, the things that we consider simple, right? Where will exploring the depths of simplicity take us? Pearls, for example, are found inside an oyster shell. The outside of an oyster shell is not exactly attractive. It's just kind of gray looking and not attractive at all. And the insides, oysters are so slimy, right? Yeah. And yet the pearl is formed inside that oyster by a little grain of sand maybe, or some other irritant that gets inside the oyster, and then it secretes some other pearl around this irritant, and eventually it creates the pearl, and it becomes bigger, of course, the more the mother of pearl is secreted around it. And of course, the bigger it gets, the more value that its value increases. And so our problems can become a part of God's solution. And this also is God showing up in ways that we don't expect.
How are our problems part of God's solution?
Well, you had Joseph there. He was in prison, and he was a slave there and such like that. And he wanted to get out of prison, and yet God used that. He brought the baker and the whatever to the prison, and Joseph interpreted those dreams. And it was a couple years later or something like that, that finally that came to fruition, and all of a sudden the cupbearer did remember, oh yes, I should have told Pharaoh. And so he did, and there was Joseph's problem, it really became a part of a solution. Now Joseph was able to see, eventually, years later, even after that, his brothers, dreams that he had being lived out. If that was too long of an answer, wasn't it? But you asked, and then you sit there looking at me and laughing at me.
Well, it also reminds me of something you said months ago.
What's that?
Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, sometimes God's plan is for you to walk through the valley of the shadow of death. Was not Joseph walking through the valley of the shadow in a prison? And yet it was part of the plan.
Mm-hmm. Right, it's death to self.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what we go through sometimes may seem like punishment or God's, but it might actually be all part of the plan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we too are becoming more shaped and ready for the future that God has for us.
Yeah. See, I listen. I pay attention.
Yes,
I even remember things from way back.
Yeah.
Because I always thought that was pretty profound.
Okay. Well,
it was. Just because there's times in my own life where I thought, why am I this? And it turns out it actually came back to my life and was something God used to, open another door or something.
No, that's true. Like you're taking signs.
Exactly. Stuff like that where I did it. And why am I here? I'm doing this. But years later it came out, oh man, I'm glad God had me do that because now this door's open.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Well, we've got 2 more stories. I guess we could try to rush through them.
Yeah. How long has it been so far, Aspen?
Yeah. 36?
36
Oh, okay.
minutes.
We can throw on just a little bit more here and finish it up. Because if we skip any part, then the ending doesn't really make as much sense. Yeah. So okay, Abraham is next. He was 100 years old when God gave him the promised son, right? And one day when he least expected it, God told him to sacrifice his promised son. Now, I find it interesting that God did not ask him to sacrifice the unpromised son, right? I mean, kind of would have made it a lot easier that way, but no, he asked him to sacrifice his promised son, given to him by God, no less, right? And now God wants him to sacrifice his son to him. And I'm sure he absolutely could not believe where he was in life when he raised his hand with the knife in it to sacrifice his son, right? And I can only imagine what great relief he had when he heard the voice of God saying, no, don't do it. He must have dropped that knife and just given his son, Isaac, the biggest hug ever, right? And when he looked up, he saw the ram that God had provided for the sacrifice, caught in the bushes, right? So God showed up when least expected, doing what only God could do. So God, out of this situation, he created something bigger, right? When Abraham gave up the gift that God had given him, God gave him more. It's like the parable of the sower. Single seeds were sown, and they grew up, and they produced more seeds, and they fell into the ground, and of course, they grow up producing more, a crop of 30, 60, or 100 times more. So on a personal level for Abraham, this experience increased his relationship with God, right? On a bigger scale, it shows a level of faith that most of us don't even entirely understand. It seems like every time you bring up the story of faith, or you start talking about Abraham and that sacrifice of Isaac and such, it's a big situation to try to wrap your mind around. It also, of course, became an example of God giving up his son to die for us. And it helps simplify God's greatest gift to us so we can just see it from different angles. And so we don't always fully understand our problems. At the moment that God asked him to sacrifice his son, Abraham certainly did not fully understand that. And while it seemed a great big problem to Abraham, it was not a problem for God at all. And we wonder why, right? So God's solutions sometimes feel a little bit gritty. Sometimes years after moving past a problem, we still don't understand the solution. But God and faith will always be bigger than we can understand. We can experience both of them. We can know that they exist. We can go through that change that they create in our lives ourselves. But I'm sure that even Abraham, having lived through that faith experience, didn't understand all of it. And yet I am sure it no doubt gave him plenty of moments of deep reflection on that.
Yes, I concur.
Okay. now Brett's taking on my answers.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So then there's Gideon, who God arranged circumstances for Gideon to go into battle against this vast army. Right? It was the Bible says there in Judges 6 and 7 that the army he was supposed to go against was so vast that you couldn't count his camels, and God handpicked 300 men for him to go into battle against this vast army with. Right? So in Judges chapter 7, God tells Gideon if he's afraid to attack, then he should take a servant with him and go down to the enemy camp on the edges of it, and he'll hear something there, right? Or see something that then he won't be afraid to go into battle. And so when they arrive, they overhear a man telling his buddy about a dream that he had had. And the man said, I had a dream. A round loaf of barley came tumbling into the Midianite camp, and it struck the tent with such force that the tent overturned and collapsed. And his buddy replied, this can be nothing other than the sword of Gideon, son of Joash the Israelite. God had given the Midianites into the whole camp into his hands, right? And so Gideon and his servant, they go back to the 300 soldiers, and now they are all ready to go into battle, quite sure what God is going to do for them. So God, of course, destroyed the enemy for them. Gideon lived by faith, and faith is living out a loving relationship with God. Now, if you go back and read through Judges 6 and 7 where this story is found, not once do you hear Gideon say anything about how much he loves God or has faith in God. He has a lot of doubt. He has a lot of no faith type words coming out of his mouth, and the things that he does, with the putting out the fleece twice and things like that, right? Okay? And yet, we see what he did, and we can say that he lived by faith, right? Which is a loving relationship with God. So I listened to a YouTube video by Joe Navarro this last week, and he's a former FBI agent who is apparently well known for his body language reading skills. And so he mentioned the astronomer Carl Sagan. Yep. So he said, Carl Sagan asked, who are we? He suggested all we are is a sum total of our influence on others. And that, he said, that is all that we are, not how much we earn and not how many cars that we have sitting in our garage. It is our influence on each other. And Joe Navarro took that a little further. He said the primary way that we influence others is through nonverbal communication. It's that nice handshake that we give someone. It's a pat on the shoulder. It is the touch of a hand. It is a behavior that communicates love in ways that words simply cannot express. And so, I guessed that Carl Sagan was probably an atheist, and yet he wasn't an atheist. He claimed to be an agnostic, right? So, but it's interesting how what he said, we are is exactly who Jesus says that we are. We are to love God first and to love our neighbors, right? That is our sphere of influence, and we are to, as Joe Navarro says, our actions of love say far more than any words that we can say. And so, Joseph had a problem, and Gideon had a problem, and Abraham had a problem, and what did they do? They lived out the love of God in their sphere of influence. And they loved God, they loved their fellow man. We cannot see beyond our problem. That's why it's a problem, right? If we could see beyond it, we would have the solution. We are the sphere of our influence, right? Living out love to others. God has a key to close doors. Okay, sometimes it feels like we're in a dark hallway and we have a problem and we want to get out. And yet, while we know that there are doors on either side of this hallway, we should not go running down the hallway trying to find one that will open. Because if God has us there in the dark hallway, we can learn something much better by just waiting on Him to do it for us. Think Abraham waiting for the promised son versus Abraham having Ishmael, right? We can learn far more in that waiting for God to open the door that He wants to open for us than we would by rushing along and trying to do it ourselves. And so God is the one with the key to close doors and heaven's gates. We're to simply live out love in our sphere of influence. We're to seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and He provides everything else for us. So God shows up when least expected, but His timing is always impeccable.
Yeah, that's good. Kind of shows that in all three of those stories. Yeah. All right. Well, there you go. Yeah, we're...
Yeah, we sorry we rushed through that last little bit.
So, hope you're having a good week, and I don't know. Every time I look at the weather, it keeps saying the heat dome is going to stay on us, but hopefully we'll get, fall and winter coming soon, because boy, I'm ready for it.
Oh yes, well, as I'm sure the picture showed, time flies by.
Yeah, that it does. That it does. All right, well, thanks for joining us, and hope you had a good Sabbath, and